now, with Ukraine having held off Russia for a year, I think it's fair to say that the dominant expectation is that a long, grinding war in the long run benefits Russia. However inspiring and resilient the Ukrainian people have shown themselves to be, ultimately Russia is a much bigger country, and per capita it's paying a much lower cost for this war. And so in that formulation, time is on Russia's side. The longer the war grinds on, the more likely it is that Russia comes out the ultimate victor. Now, not everyone holds that view, of course, but I think it's fair to say that it's a widely held Western expectation. Given how badly widely held Western expectations have fared over the course of this past year when it comes to this war, I think perhaps it's worth looking at that one too. On the occasion of President Biden's surprise trip to Kyiv today to meet with President Zelensky in Ukraine, Anne Applebaum argues in The Atlantic that actually in this case, part of what President Biden's trip to Kyiv says is that time isn't on Russia's side. Time is on Ukraine's side. And that's a message that everybody, including Russia, should now get. How could that be? Joining us now is Anne Applebaum. She's a Pulitzer Prize winner, staff writer at The Atlantic. Ms. Applebaum, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Delighted.
First, let me just ask you if you agree with that framing, that there have been some big Western expectations about how this last year would go that have been wrong, proved wrong at a pretty fundamental level.
Look, we got almost everything about this war wrong. A year ago today, most people expected the capital in Kiev to fall within a few days. They thought Zelensky would flee the country, the president of Ukraine. If he wasn't going to flee the country, they thought he would be almost certainly assassinated or would be very quickly arrested or eliminated. There were lists circulating of Ukrainians who were due to be arrested. That didn't happen. We were very wrong both about the Russian military and about the Ukrainians. We didn't factor in the corruption of Russia. When we heard how much money had been spent on the Russian military, we thought it had gone to buying weapons. Actually, turned out that quite a lot of it had gone to buy villas in the south of France or apartments in London. And I think we missed the story of Ukraine. We missed the reconstruction of Ukraine that took place after 2014. We missed the resurgence of Ukrainian civil society. It's a society that's really built from the ground up and not the top down. A lot of young people run it. It's you see many ministers and deputy ministers who are in their 30s and 40s. They really replaced the generation of kind of post-Soviet leaders who'd led the country up until 8 or 9 years ago, and we misread how the war was going to go. And so I think it's worth continually asking ourselves whether we're not misreading what's going to happen in the next few months or the next couple of years as well. So I think your framing in that sense is absolutely right.
And all of those mistakes or false assumptions or things that have been proven wrong all sort of go in one direction. They all lend to us overestimating Russia's capabilities and underestimating Ukraine's. Is it possible now, after a year, that we're in danger of overcorrecting for that and overestimating what Ukraine can withstand, underestimating what Russia, particularly the Russian military, is capable of?
So the Russian military, most people who are watching it don't think that the Russian military is capable of anything extraordinary and incredible. They're not capable of any great breakthroughs. They have a lot of people whom they're willing to sacrifice. They've proved that they're willing to tolerate really an extraordinary number of casualties that unimaginable, for example, in the United States, that we could have up to 200,000 casualties and that there would be no public outcry or no objection, especially in a war that most people aren't interested in or don't feel strongly about or even really are afraid to discuss. So of course, I don't want to indicate that Russia is to be somehow discounted or ignored. As you said earlier in the program, President Putin is going to make a speech tomorrow, which may well call for a new mobilization. He might call for the move to a war economy. He might close the borders. All kinds of things are possible. But I also think we should keep in mind the Ukrainians have been working very hard to think about new and different ways to fight. They are good at reinventing weapons, changing the way they work, whether it's cheap drones or or more expensive American equipment. They sometimes have made it work in new ways. They use it in unusual ways. I know that they're thinking hard about what advantages they can have against, against a large military Russian force. And I think it's important not to underestimate them again either. It's also a war in which I think we have to take into consideration the possibility of black swan events. We don't really know what's going on inside the Kremlin. We don't have any way of finding out. Many things could change very quickly. Public support for the war in Russia could crumble very quickly. Public support in the sense of the small number of people around Putin could change rapidly once it becomes clear that the war can't be won. So, there are lots of strange and unexpected factors that I'd hate to sit here and make bad predictions 1 year into the war when, as I said a year ago, people got almost everything wrong.
But as you say, I think it's wise to say, watch out for the unexpected. And I think that actually includes watching out for what we're going to hear tomorrow from President Putin in his sort of State of the State speech. Those potential previews that you gave there in terms of what people will be looking for, moving to a wartime economy, potentially closing the borders, other extreme measures like that, could put things on a very different footing for him domestically. It'll be really interesting to watch. Anne Applebaum, staff writer at The Atlantic. I really appreciate you making time to be here tonight. I know you've been traveling a lot recently, and this is late at night. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.